Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I'm not a licensed therapist, but what I am is somebody who is really desperate this week for something unexpected to happen. We were just talking about this recently when we were talking about our relationship, and I was talking about how the parts of our relationship that I really love and the things that I value and the memories I look back on are not the planned things, but oftentimes the little unexpected things that just sort of happen and evolve, or the little surprises that come out. I'm really missing that from this show, and you know, it's really kind of been a little bit of a downer. Perfectly fine episode, nothing wrong with the episode, other than the fact that it was again just so predictable.
Yeah, I think we all were going into this episode just expecting that Zoe was going to go home, and so it was kind of like all this lead up for not a whole lot. Like the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, you know.
Yeah. And even everything that we saw, I don't feel like we got any new information this entire episode, right? It was just a lot of kind of the same narration that we've been getting from all of the individuals and from Grant himself. But before we get too further into that, go ahead and tell the good people what we're doing here.
Yes, we are back talking about Grant Ellis's season of The Bachelor, season 29, and this is episode 8, also known as Fantasy Suite Week. So we're going to be giving all of our thoughts and opinions on what we saw. And, you know, just hold on a second before we get there. Please do us a huge favor and hit that like button at the bottom of this video and subscribe. It is such a small thing that actually goes such a long way, and we really, really appreciate it.
And please also hit that bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel. So we already kind of opened with some opening thoughts. Anything stuck out to you?
I mean, really, the biggest focus for me was how humid it must have been in Dominican Republic. That's really all I kept thinking about.
I mean, poor Grant, he showed up to that Juliana date and he was dripping with sweat before the date even started. That's me when we go to Cancun.
Well, this is me too. So yeah, I was hard relating to the humidity struggles for sure. But no, I mean, that was a focal point for me in this episode. But it just, I think, and we had said this as we watched, there were parts of this episode that just felt a little scripted. They felt a little inauthentic. I felt like I was watching Love is Blind, and one of our biggest criticisms of this season was it felt like pretty performative. And so it was feeling a little stiff. You know, I have said a few weeks ago, like there have been moments on the show where I feel like, oh, this feels so personal. I feel like I'm intruding, having this moment with them. I did not feel any of that. And this is supposed to be the week where like intimacy happens, and not necessarily physical intimacy, emotional intimacy too. But it was lacking for me. It was
a very wooden episode. I wrote stiff and wooden in the notes a lot. I agree with you 100%.
Weird use of words for this.
Stiff and wooden?
For this
hey, listen, episode. It's Fantasy Suites, baby. So should we just do a real quick good date, bad date?
Sure.
I think we can just kind of consolidate them all up into one because they all effectively were the exact same dates. Slight variations. We had a daytime activity, which was not useful for this level of or this stage of the show. And then we basically had a dinner, which, you know, is a dinner. I think it's very easy to say, at least in my opinion, that Zoe got the worst version of it. And Latia got the best version of it. But from, you know, best to worst, not a lot of variability here, right?
I mean, I think there, between Latia and it was a great representation of where they are in the relationships. Like Latia's was just slightly better than Juliana's, and Zoe's, yes, was, you know, came in third, but like was such a distant third that it was a silent date, was, you know, meaningful. So, yeah,
I think production maybe is not liking Zoe, or they just flat out don't want her to win, because this was terrible. Like, who even thought this up, right? You're gonna have a silent date. You've had no one-on-one time to speak of, and we're gonna go send you in your last opportunity to make an impact. We're gonna go send you to a activity you hate that's also gonna be silent.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I know. Felt bad for Zoe.
Yep. But so let's go into Juliana. So we open up with her doing one of her consults, Her consultation is with Daisy. You'll all remember that I was a big Daisy fan. I really thought that she was going to win that season. She did not. She came in second, but she's just kind of well known as being a pretty genuine, nice, thoughtful, sweet girl, right? Unfortunately, it just didn't feel like they really were relating with one another. I didn't really get that there was a lot of value added here. Felt a little stiff and performative. I didn't really get that Zoe had. I'm sorry. I didn't get that Daisy had a lot to kind of offer. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of the consults, this was the weakest of the three. And, it's interesting that they brought Daisy back. I mean, I know why she did, because her exit was so iconic, and she was a runner-up. I don't know what they're trying to tell us here. But the thing about it was that it seemed that Daisy had a really clear idea that it wasn't her. And it wasn't him either. And so it just feels really interesting that they brought her back for this, I don't know. And maybe that's why she couldn't really relate or give as meaningful of advice as, like, say, Katie Bigger, who met with Latia later.
Yeah, I don't know, but it definitely didn't feel like this was a great consultation.
Yeah, I don't even really have many notes for it, other than, Juliana telling Daisy about her history of being cheated on, and that being the thing that is, creating some anxiety for her. And, Daisy was kind and, tried to tell her to kind of be in the moment or whatever, communicate. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of like relatability there going on, as we saw in the other consults.
Yeah. The thing about the narration here of Juliana with the, being cheated on is it's starting for me to feel a little Jen Tran here, right? Where it's all she's talking about. She's talking about how traumatic it was. And look, I understand being cheated on is something that can really impact somebody. But on the grand scale of bad things that can happen to somebody, this is a pretty common thing. And I feel like there's just not much. She's trying to play sort of the victim Olympics in some ways, because she knows that that's kind of the script of this show. And they're just, compared to some of the others, it's just not ranking up. And it's getting a little tiring. It's kind of like Jen Tran. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep talking about my toxic exes. And then the narration starts falling apart later on. It's starting to feel that way for me with Juliana.
Well, okay. And like, there was a point during this episode where I was like, did we hit rewind? Like, it felt so repetitive, this episode, where I was like, I think at one point I wrote, like, she's telling everybody but Grant about this at this point. I think we heard about it like 4 times in total, just this episode. And I to kind of empathize with Juliana, she's, relatively young, and one of her most formative dating and relationship experiences was deeply hurtful, and for her was traumatic. And so it makes sense that a huge part of your relationship identity, or who you are in a relationship, centers around this one thing, and that you formulated a lot of your own beliefs about yourself and your insecurities based on this thing happening to you, because she doesn't have like a huge like runway of life experience. If we were to maybe compare it to women that are on the Golden Bachelor, maybe if one of their husbands was had cheated on them, that this might be part of their story, but it wouldn't be the whole thing. And so I think that it speaks to just general life experience in some ways. But like, we are also butting up against him potentially having the opportunity to sleep with other women. And so it makes sense that it would be so prominent today,
Sure. Yeah.
I'm glad that she finally told him. We've had seasons in the past where like there is this big elephant in the room that we know about as the audience, but they don't share with the lead, or they don't share until the very end or after the fact. And so I'm glad that it's finally out there, and we see her, when she's having this talk with him in the nighttime portion, start to cry. And while she's still smiling as she's crying, like we do see some more like emotion from her. And she's someone who a few weeks ago told us that like her defense mechanism is just to kind of like be happy and like be bubbly about things. That's like kind of how she copes. And so it was a good sign that she was letting herself tap into some of the rawness, the sadness. But she said she feels broken as a result of what happened. And maybe, that's how she's internalized this.
Well, before we get too far ahead to the dinner, let's just recap very quickly. The daytime activities were dune buggying, four-wheeling, dune buggying. Yep. Where Grant was not holding anything back. He was going straight through the puddles, making a mess.
Are you kidding? You want to get yourself wet and get some breeze on you with all that humidity. I was like, that is exactly what I would do.
Mhm.
Like, A, cover up some of the sweat, give me some relief from the humidity with some of this disgusting water, and like whip some air in my face, please. That I was like, I all for it.
Well, I can just say this is how we can tell that you are slightly bit more experienced and older than Juliana, because she is still in her please don't get my hair wet stage of life. She was not. She can say whatever she wants. She was not enjoying this. There was no part of this that was
none
enjoyable.
of those women enjoyed their dates.
Oh, no. None of these dates. Zero enjoyment on these dates. Mm-hmm. Some of them were more. I think Juliana, probably of the three, did the best at pretending and acting like she was having a good time. But yeah.
Yes. Juliana was concerned about when they stopped, like taking off the goggles and whatnot, kind of like what her makeup and hair looked like, which Grant noticed and pointed out to us as the audience, to her later on, and just like kind of noticing Juliana's maybe emphasis on looking perfect. Mm-hmm. What did you think about that?
I mean, my comment about Juliana is the same thing I would say about Carolina. When you are in the top 0.1% of most beautiful women who have ever lived in the history of the world, I would lean into that too. Like, I mean, literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say that, right? Probably maybe even 0.001%, right? So, I use what you got. No judgment here. And
at what point would it bother you if someone was like too much into their appearance?
That's a great question. So there's a practicalness that has to be respected. So I dated the girl before you, and I would pick her up for a date, and let's just say I'm supposed to pick her up at 7:00, and she would make me wait until 7:45 because she would try on literally 10 outfits, and there was no respect for time. We'd be late to every possible thing, and we're talking about fractional of a percentage difference. Like, the difference between outfit 1 and outfit 10 was less than 0.5%. And the extra 30 minutes she did doing her hair made no difference whatsoever. That's where it really starts to bother me. Like, this is the 80-20 rule, right? Where you do something to 80% because that last 20% takes up 90% of the effort. And I do think that that's a good metric for how much effort you should put into a lot of, we'll say, day-to-day average practical stuff. I think you should put in 100% of your relationships because that's really important. I think you should put in 100% of raising your children. Absolutely. I think you should put in 100% in your career, except for when it's in conflict with your family in some way, shape, or form. But when we're talking about we're going out to catch a movie, I don't need you at 100% if it means that it's going to take you an extra 2 hours to get ready. That's where it's frustrating. Mm-hmm. Take 45 minutes. If it takes you longer than 45 minutes to get ready, I'm out, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think a lot of it also is part of it is not even necessarily how long you take to get ready, but it's the like respect. If you want to take 2 hours to get ready, then fine, but don't tell me to pick you up at 7. Mm-hmm. If you're not even going to start getting ready till 6 and it takes you 2 hours every time. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a respect thing there as well. Mm-hmm. Like, respect other people's time. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily care how long it takes you to get ready, as long as, you're not leaving me outside in my car waiting for 45 minutes, right? So I think that's...
I'm the opposite. I overestimate how long it takes me to get ready.
Always, yes.
I'm fast to get ready, though.
And that's one of the things I love about you. There's a practicalness to the way you get ready, where it's like, what am I actually going to do? I don't need to spend 2 hours if we're going to the post office, right? Mm-hmm. And I respect that and I like that. So the answer is, it's less about how long it takes. It's more about the respect you show in the process. Mm-hmm. And it's about having at least some awareness of what are you actually doing and how much is actually necessary, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we do go to the night portion, a lot of which I've already sort of covered, but why don't you kind of fill in the blanks that I might have missed?
Sure. So in the night portion, Not a lot of new material for the audience. Grant gets the new information that she has been cheated on. She spent 6-7 years or so in a relationship until finally she left it for her own mental health. There are a lot of little, I would think, holes and problems with this story, but Grant's not going to ask them, and we're not going to get coverage of them, even if he did. But basically, Grant does what Grant does. He starts to cry and is very empathic about the whole thing. But from the perspective of the audience, kind of boring, because we've already heard this story 3 times in this episode, plus 2 episodes ago, plus 3 episodes ago. So there was no new information. Grant did exactly what Grant does. There was, we expected that he would handle it well. We expect that he would respond with empathy and with compassion. He did that. I think Grant did all the things he was supposed to do.
Yep.
I don't know. And, it laid flat for me, though.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm trying to think about why. It's like they both said all the right things. And Grant, gave a great response. He was, as you said, very empathetic. He was also vulnerable. And he said something like, I don't want to get hurt either, but I'm not afraid to take the lead. And, I'm falling in love with you. And I think that was, a really kind thing to do in that moment to help her feel cared for and adored and all that stuff that she was not feeling. But yeah, it was very 2-dimensional.
I feel like coming after the picnic bench at the end of the dune buggy ride, that felt like a moment where it was 2 people sitting on a bench reading lines before they went on camera, right? And so I think just coming immediately on the back of that, I was already sort of soured to the performative nature of this entire date and how it just felt like they were so hyper aware of the cameras. And so then we rolled into this date, and or the evening portion of the date, and I feel like that's what was kind of holding me back from really giving them the benefit of the doubt that this was more of a genuine moment, which is too bad because they are 2 people who have had a lot of genuine moments.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing, just as they're kind of closing out, they do go to the fantasy suite. We see their morning check-in kind of thing, and then as they're parting, Juliana says, "Don't forget about me," and then she says something like, "I know I'm going to spiral, thinking about him with the other women," and that's one thing that we actually don't see. We don't hear any of her inner monologue. We don't hear any face to cameras or in the moment interviews.
We got no cutaways to the other women in any of the fantasy suites, which is bizarre.
Very odd.
Yeah. So I mean, it was an odd edit in some ways in that regard.
Flat.
Very flat. They couldn't even gin anything up for us, right? And so, I mean, name me a season where we haven't gotten somebody spiraling, the cutaways and whatnot.
Yeah. You think that's why they put Latia last, so they can show her spiraling. Even with
the men, Devin having his conversation with Jesse at the bar and stuff like that, right? Nothing. And I this was an episode that desperately needed, something, some drama, some messiness, some emotion. It just, right. Because all the emotion was kind of the Juliana, saying her story and Grant having a few tears over it. It wasn't emotion that really the audience could grab onto and really participate in. Right. So
agree.
Yep. And even the morning after, you just felt like production was giving her cues. It's okay, now you're going to sit in the plunge pool with your feet, and then you're going to get up and walk away. It's just even though all of that just felt like she's getting the cues from production exactly what to do.
Yeah. Agreed.
Tough watch. And I really like Juliana, so I was really disappointed by her whole date. The whole section of it, really. I don't think she did herself any.
But she did well.
Favors.
I mean, listen, it was all good.
Well, I mean, she was making it to the finale anyways. But with that, do we just move on to Zoe?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Zoe's date starts off with a consultation with Rachel, who was the 3rd person out on Joey's season. Was this the most perfect pairing?
Yeah.
Right. So we all remember my takes on Rachel. She had no business being in the top 3.
She was friend zoned.
She was friend zoned very early on, had no business being there. She just sort of got there by just outlasting everybody else.
She was a fan favorite though.
Yeah, sure. But there was no chemistry, there was nothing there. And it was pretty obvious early on. And even when you went into her hometowns, you sat there the whole time saying what are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. And literally everything I just said about Rachel is exactly where Zoe is.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
they are about as approximations of one another as they can be. So I thought it was a great consultation.
The thing that was notable about Zoe and Rachel's exchange is that Rachel was so disarming for Zoe. Like this is the first time we see Zoe like really just be comfortable. I mean, a little bit with her family, of course, but like she seemed like light and like she has like a stiffness to her, like maybe a little bit of an awkwardness. But she just seemed so much more comfortable, and seeing her feel a little bit more natural in relating to another woman was good to see. And I think we got to meet Zoe in a different way than we've been able to in these other settings.
I 100% agree. I think her time here with Rachel was the best glimpse into probably who she really is as a person. It was nice to see, but the reality is too little too late.
Yeah.
And, Grant isn't seeing this. He hasn't seen it yet.
That's what I was going to say is we don't know that Grant hasn't seen it. It just might not carry you over on film,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's possible.
She has made it this far.
Yeah, but I mean, Rachel made it this far too, right? I mean, I think people make it as far as they do for reasons outside of they're really the top 3 pick.
Sure.
Right? I think there are a lot of reasons why people get ousted when they get ousted, and why people make it even when they aren't necessarily would be in that spot if Grant were to just line up everybody start to finish.
Fair. So basically, Rachel tells Zoe, like, make the best use of your time. Like, talk, have the conversations you need to have. Like, just make good use of your time.
Which tells you Rachel had no idea the date she was going into.
So, yes. So Zoe...
Great advice from Rachel. Production screwed Zoe.
Yeah.
Completely screwed her.
They put Zoe and Grant on a silent partner yoga date, which you're putting 2 people together that barely know each other now. Trying to figure this out together and trying to communicate with eye contact and body language when they barely communicate orally was just...
I love when they say, Grant was saying, like, we need to, he's trying to make the best of it. We need to be like attuned to each other in a nonverbal way. Like, dude, you need to have verbal conversation about values and where you're going to live and things like that. And then when you settle on that, now you can non-verbally attune with some yoga. But I mean, what is Grant going to do?
Yeah.
He's under contract. He's got to pretend like this all makes sense and it's not the worst possible date. But I mean, look, I don't think any of us believe Zoe ever had a shot of making it to the finale. And if there was a shot, production just torpedoed whatever she was going to attempt to do here by giving her a silent date. And what I love, and by love I mean hate, is that when they would talk or whisper, the yoga instructors are literally shushing them. It's like, oh, come on,
I'd love to hear in the comments your theories about why Zoe got this date. Like, what's up? Why was she saddled with this one? Like, she was the one that needed the time the most.
Yep.
So, yeah, let us know your thoughts.
I mean, I would just like to know, why was this even in the cards? Why would this date even be a possibility? No date that you can't talk should be allowed, period.
Yeah.
But it sure as hell should not be allowed this deep into the competition.
They do sometimes have them, but they're just a portion, maybe.
Sure. Well, the other thing was...
Or maybe we've seen them on Paradise when they're like a little bit more sexual,
Yeah. Well, but one of the things here is the other 2 dates had an activity, then some talking time, then dinner. Zoe really didn't get that middle portion either. So her daytime activity, her active activity, was silent. She didn't get the picnic on the bench or the swim in the cenote either. Then they go straight to dinner. So she really got screwed on 2 axes here.
Yeah.
Right? Brutal. I feel bad for her. I mean, but is what it is.
So they go into the nighttime portion. And by the way, beautiful dress. If you want to try to locate that dress for me, you're welcome to.
I'll have to take another look at it.
It
was like orangey.
It was like floral, like flowy, like kind of a V-neck, kind of pretty slit. It was very pretty.
I'm a sucker for a high thigh slit.
They were everywhere this episode.
I know. You know what? Hey, listen, I'm in for it.
So they have their nighttime portion, and at dinner, it's kind of comical because she's like, yeah, I don't really know anything about you.
Tell me something about you. This was a date 1 conversation they were having.
And what does he tell her? My favorite color is blue.
Oh, I know. And he did get into the whole thing with his family and his father, but like, This is it,
Well,
it was so
I
sad
know.
to watch this,
I
knowing
know.
you are at Fantasy Suites
I
and you
know.
are having a date one conversation about basic stuff. It's just so indicative of where they are.
Yeah. One thing that I did like that they did, which was kind of sweet, and again, the way that they're trying to like silver lining this whole thing, was that they were both sharing what they've observed of one another
Because they
since
have
the
no
beginning.
experiences with one another.
That's true. It's like a nice reframe for that. But I thought that was kind of sweet, that they were both kind of sharing what they've noticed about one another and what they've deduced, what they've learned about one another, just like through observation.
Anything else we want to talk about with Zoe? So we will move on to Latia, who by most people's calculation is the front runner. And I don't think that we are dissuaded or pushed off of that assumption by any of the events of this episode, right?
To the point where they're pushing it so much where I'm like, it must be Juliana.
Must be. Just gin up something for us. Yeah. So her consultation is with Katie somebody or other. Tell me about this one.
So Katie's from Zach Shallcross's season, which is the season before Joey's. So that was season 27 of The Bachelor. And just a little bit of context about Zach's season. Zach came from Rachel and Gabby's season. He was one of Rachel Recchia's frontrunners until he wasn't. Like there was a very clear heel turn with Zach and Rachel, and he and Rachel broke up. And there's, in some ways, it like has always been a little bit of a mystery, like what happened in the fantasy suite that like made this not a thing. Anyway, so he was selected as the Bachelor, and everyone was like, but why? He's kind of a dud. He seems boring, a little bit robotic. They had like, people saying like he's like AI, like all of that, but genuinely good guy. His season was entertaining because he wasn't necessarily a strong lead. And
so just got like messy.
Yeah, a little messy with the women. He had a great cast as well. But his top three were Ariel, Gabby, and Katie. And Zach, as Katie alluded to, famously went into his week of the fantasy suites and said, it's no sex. I'm not having sex with anyone.
What every Bachelor should say right at the outset.
Or just don't say it. But he like made this proclamation.
No, say it and commit to it, and don't do that, and you won't get yourself into any problems.
Or just don't make any proclamations.
Sure.
So he ended up making this whole big thing about how he wasn't going to have sex, and then he has sex with Gabby.
Just with Gabby?
I think just with Gabby. I don't think he and Ariel had sex. And so he has sex with Gabby, and then he's on his date with Katie, and he's like feeling guilty and unburdening himself and telling Katie about it. And
very selfish thing to do. But
and what Katie was relaying to Latia was very accurate. She was like, I didn't want to know this. Like I, in my mind, knew that this was a possibility, and I had like reconciled that. Like I didn't need to know this. Long story short, Gabby and Katie end up being Zach's final two, and he picks Katie. And it was pretty devastating for Gabby. Gabby felt really guilty about it. I mean, it was pretty messy for Gabby, to the point where I thought she was going to be the next Bachelorette.
Wasn't she? Her and Rachel together?
No, that was a different Gabby.
Oh, different Gabby? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Charity was the Bachelorette after. But anyway, that it was a whole big mess. And so for Katie to be the one to talk to Latia actually did make a lot of sense. I thought it was a good pairing. Katie was also just such a good cast member, and I like her a lot. Total like normal, unproblematic vibes all around. But I really appreciated her advice. I thought she gave the strongest advice, was the most directive in terms of what Latia should be doing and not doing, where her priority and where her focus should be. And it just spoke to Katie's own security as a person, and I guess in her relationship with Zach. And I think she was like trying to impart that on to Latia. And I think that's what Latia needed to hear.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the three consultations, this was just all around the best one. And with that additional context, I get it, why they would have selected and paired these two together.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, she's a fan favorite in a lot of ways, but it's also curious, right? Like, again, the production setting us up. Katie's the winner of Zach's season, and they're putting her with Latia, who's the front runner of this season. And so, again, they're trying to. I hate when I feel like they're trying too hard to sell me something because I'm like, no, now I need to look the other way.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, it was such a hard sell for Latia. I think I came into this week thinking Juliana was actually going to be the pick. But I mean, the problem is that all signs are pointing to Latia. Like every sign is pointing in that direction. But so Latia's dates here are ziplining, which again, 0 for 3 production. She hated this date. She was getting nauseous. She was not, enjoying herself at all. Grant, gives a muddled kind of response to this. Sometimes during this episode, he's saying, I think she might be enjoying herself. Other times he's saying, I know she's not enjoying herself. He does what Grant does. Like, we're just going to push through. I really do wonder, though, like, this is one of those moments where I feel like the proper thing for Grant to do is be like, I don't think you're having fun. Like, we did a couple of these. We did 3 of these. Yeah. Let's go sit on that bench over there. Yeah. I'm sure there's a bench around here somewhere. Right. And the fact that they kept pushing through, I don't know. To me, I would have felt a little bit guilty and bad about it.
The thing that it occurred to me while we were watching, because I had that same thought, was it reminded me of the zip lines in Salvatica, where there was almost no out. Like, it was a loop, and in order to get out, you had to complete them.
Well, there was a way out. So, by the way, Salvatica, place down in Cancun, fantastic. If you're ever down that way, great zip lines where you're actually like climbing into the trees. Right. It's not this like a bunch of man-made nonsense. Yeah. So good. Although I hear that they built it all up. They actually have like a lot of more man-made stuff. They have like kind of roller coastery style things, but the old school, but they still have all the old school kind of like you're climbing into the trees. Style
cool.
ones. It was very, very cool. Yeah, it was basically just ziplining from treehouse to treehouse. It was awesome. But yeah, that was definitely there were points where you could exit, but it not necessarily super easy to exit. But you can.
No, of course they have to.
Yeah,
but
there's always an exit plan.
It didn't feel that simple that they could just be like, all right, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you.
We should go back to Selvac. We haven't been in a few years.
Sure.
Yeah. So then they get the cenote. They don't get a bench. They get a little dock on a cenote. Beautiful cenote. And they have, okay, I'm going to be a little critical of Latia. So I thought their conversation in the cenote was...
I don't think it was actually a cenote. I think it was just like...
A little pool?
Sure.
Okay. A fake cenote?
Sure.
Okay. They're in the fake cenote. And they have a conversation here, which I thought the conversation was good.
Was this when they talked about her timeline with kids, or was that a
Yes, yeah. So they're talking about kids, and in general, I think important topics are getting discussed here. The problem is that Latia is ruminating over this I'm not going to be physical with them stuff, and there's just like clearly a lot boiling over. And one thing about Latia is that early in the season, she had this like really slow drawl verbal fry, and it disappeared like on episode 2. And she talked like a sophisticated young professional woman. And this episode, that slow drawl and verbal fry
must be associated with nervousness.
It must be. And the problem was, it was so like all through dinner and all through the cenote conversation, it was so like I personally, it's just a pet peeve of mine. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. But just her entire way she was engaging, the mannerisms, the demeanor was very like childlike. Like I just felt like I was watching like a young child try to have a conversation, kind of confused and not really know what's going on, and having all this elongated, drawling, speech and words.
She wasn't speaking with a lot of confidence.
No confidence, yeah. And it was just like I found it so frustrating because you are the leader in this, so clear as day, and Grant has already demonstrated exactly who he is as a person. Like, and it felt like she was almost building up drama for the sake of building up drama. Like, do you want to go to the fantasy suite with me? Oh, well, I gotta give this long spiel now. And you could see on Grant's face, he's like, what's going on here right now? Like, are you saying no? Because it sounds like you're saying no. Like, this isn't necessary. A simple, while we're in the fake cenote, a simple, by the way, I'm not having sex with you. Like, that's it. That's all you had to say. And Grant would have been like, totally understand. Cool. Let's move on. Like, this whole lead up and it was unnecessary. And she did it with that. And she did it with
Well, it
other
tells you a
things as
lot
well.
about her relationship to sex or her feelings about sex. And she, I think, was maybe worried that they might not be aligned, or, because the way that she had to qualify it so much and the preamble that she had to give, I think, again, is telling. And I was also, I know you were like actively criticizing this while you were watching it. And I was saying, like, we also need to remember like her strong, like, religious ties. And I think that she does need to provide the transparency, or feel the need to provide this transparency because of that. Because if she just goes into the fantasy suite and says yes without any of this preamble, then that could appear as though it's not aligned.
I 100% agree with you there. My issue is not the disclosure. My problem is the lengthy preamble. Like, it's just unnecessary. You've met Grant. He knows you're a Mormon. He's met your family. Like, this should just be expected of him. If he does not expecting this as your situation, then like, he missed a major thing, and that's a red flag for you. The reality, though, is if you can't just confidently say, hey, by the way, not having sex with you tonight, just to be clear, and it's like matter of fact like that, then that's saying that maybe you are not quite ready for where you're at, and maybe this is a little bit too advanced for where you are. Because it wasn't just the sex stuff; it was also about the other women stuff. Like, Grant wasn't talking about the other women at all, and then she goes into this long, rambly, thing about how she doesn't want to hear about any of the other women, and it's just like, I wasn't talking about them, but okay.
Yeah, it felt out of place when she said it, but in as you're talking about it now, it came right before this preamble about no sex. So I could imagine that in her mind, that was all lumped together and saying, like, I don't want to know if you've had sex with anybody else, but just know that you and I are not having sex. And so I could.
But that was it. 3 seconds it took you to say it. That's all it took. And you didn't do it with a verbal fry or a slow draw. That's
the
all
thing
I wanted.
is, and I've been in this position. I was just in a meeting today where like some information, like new news was being announced.
Disseminated.
And I could tell that the person that was sharing the news, the information, was really, really worried about how it was going to be received. And so she too kind of gave this long, very flowery, very complimentary, and I was like, it takes one to know one. I've done that. I've done that in staff meetings. I've done that in my own difficult conversations. And what this person did in this meeting and what Latia did and what I've done, again, is all probably from someone who's a people pleaser. So I do think that this kind of preamble comes from probably a bit of people pleasing and worrying about disappointing someone, and not necessarily feeling super secure in yourself and what you have to deliver. But I think that you're being a little too critical of her.
Well, I will say she did disappoint somebody, and that person is me. Look, I just it's nails on a chalkboard for me. It's just a personal pet peeve of mine. The slow drawl and the verbal fry is just I can't listen to it. And it's so off-putting that's all. So
well, it doesn't really matter what you think.
Because I'm not the one who's coming down to the final.
Grant, took that, ran with it, and told Latia that, he loves her. It's not falling in love anymore. He loves her.
And she reciprocated that.
She did.
Grant, I'm going to give you some free advice, buddy. There's no coming back from this.
Well,
this is kind of like having sex with Gabby. You can't not pick Gabby now. That's what it feels like to me.
Well, yeah, and we see him the next, whenever that interview was, where he says, I told her that I loved her, and then he corrects himself and says, I do love her, but maybe I should have held that back since there are others here, and who I'm falling for, and you're close to in love with someone else. It's like,
that's that. Here's the problem, right? He, in addition to that, he also said something to the effect of, I don't know if I should just send everybody else home and proceed with Latia, or if I should continue to explore other relationships. Demonstration, Grant, that maybe you don't have a solid understanding of the definition of love, but that's a different conversation. I think once you are at the point where you're saying I love you to somebody else, how do you pick Juliana now? Like, how do you
maybe
pick
that's
Juliana?
what all this drama is about. I mean, I don't know.
The interesting thing about a couple things that happened in this episode that production let through that usually they do a better job at hiding. Juliana basically specified that she is the first one. Normally, we never know what order the actual fantasy suites happen.
Oh, and fun fact from Bachelor Data's account, no contestant that has gone first has ever won.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I'm really worried for Grant next week.
Yeah, I don't think next week is going to go well for Grant. I don't think it's going to go well for Grant. Either it's going to be extraordinarily let down. If Latia's to pick, it's just anticlimactic and kind of boring, right? And if Juliana's the pick, then Grant just looks bad. Not as bad as, was it Zach having sex with Gabby bad, but pretty bad still.
Pretty bad. Yeah. And then
but could he look any worse after that star-shaped shirt that he was wearing today? That was bad.
Oh, for the next episode?
Yeah. The final scene of this week's episode with the stars. That was bad.
Well, one of the kind of like previews that we do get from next week are, I think, his mom saying essentially, akin to Barb from Pilot Pete's season, saying like, you can't marry her. Grant's mom said something to that effect, like, don't do it. And so I wonder who, she's talking about.
Well, she said something to the effect of, I need you to let that go, right?
Let that one go.
Oh,
maybe not. Maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's like
I
hang up.
This feels like she could be talking about anything.
Okay.
I mean, contextually, I need a few more words to make an assessment that we're even talking about a person.
Fair.
I mean, yeah, she could be talking about anxiety or she could be talking about
their marriage,
his father's addiction, or what's happened with the parents' marriage. Absolutely, yeah. So I guess what remains to be seen what happens next week. But so far, production has done a valiant effort this season of trying to give us some sort of hype for something or some sort of tease. But pretty much every single one's been a letdown. So I don't have hope for next week.
Yeah. I guess we finally got the conclusion of,
we do
an ending we've never seen before.
Yeah. And did you notice that Jesse, like every season, Jesse's like, it's the most dramatic, unbelievable episode, finale ever. He's not saying that.
He's saying something different. I can't remember what his quote is.
Yeah. It feels like even he's downplaying this one. Maybe that's tinfoil hat, but I'm actually, I'm doing pretty good this season on tinfoil hat theories.
I think Grant's viewership this season is way down.
It's just been so slow and kind of plodding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many other like reality dating shows now that it competes with, so I think that's also a part of it.
Yeah, and some of the others are messier, and yeah. I'm happy you asked about my rose this week.
Love it. My thorn this week.
I hated to see that. Shall we move on to rose and thorn?
Yeah.
All right. What do you got?
So my rose and thorn center around the same individual. My thorn is for, Zoe's experience on this episode. I think that was crappy. And for her to come all this way to not even be given any sort of shot.
Legitimate opportunity.
Exactly. Just feels like a bummer. Especially where my rose comes in is that we got to see her a little bit more. And that was really nice. I feel like on the Women Tell All, like clearly none of the women went hard at Zoe. And I think someone had said, like, I think she's just a little misunderstood. And so like, clearly there's more to Zoe that we weren't seeing. And so it was just genuinely nice to kind of like see a different side of her in this week. And I think that's what makes me feel so disappointed with the like opportunity that she had.
Yeah. I would say that my rose this week is the cameo of Daisy. I was a huge fan of Daisy in Joey's season, still a huge fan. So it was just nice to get a cameo from somebody. I would say that I liked Daisy more than any other cast member of this season, certainly. So it was nice to bring her back. My thorn, maybe a little bit of a petty one. DR. I think DR is one of the most overrated vacation spots. I think, for the money, you can go to a lot nicer, safer places with better food and better beaches. So I think it's, it's fine. Hey, he's from DR. I get it's important, but yeah, I'd rather go to Cancun, or Thailand, or, a lot of other places that basically cost in the same general realm of money. They give you a similar general type of experience, just better across pretty much every axis.
The water did look really beautiful though when they panned to it.
Yeah.
It was nice to see.
Yeah.
It made me excited for a vacation. Okay. We will be back next week to talk about the finale of Grant's season. So definitely tune in for that. We're hearing it's a 3-hour finale.
Why?
Just going to buckle up for that. Drink some coffee.
Unnecessary.
But yeah, we're closing out the season next week. So stay tuned for that. You can also follow along with us on Instagram at Reactivity TV. You can follow me at Amy Albero LCSW. Please keep your thoughts, your comments, your predictions, spoiler free though, coming in the comments. We love to read them and hear from you. But yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Uno más, mi amigos.